So here's my gauge unboxing video. There's a gauge. It was in a box. And now it's not in the box anymore. That's pretty much the video. Here's my new oil pressure gauge. Here's the sending unit they send for it. What else do you need? Okay, so maybe that wasn't quite fair. Unboxing videos I think are kind of I don't understand why people make unboxing videos and why some people like them. But I did pull this gauge out and the sending unit, and I pulled the sending unit off the Jaggernaut, and you can see it's got a coarse thread pitch. The sending unit has a real fine thread pitch, but then I look in the box and they've got the perfect adapter to adapt it to what I need. So I got to give credit to the, I was looking for a set of inexpensive gauges, not cheap gauges, inexpensive. And there is a difference between cheap and inexpensive, and I bought a set of these iEquus performance gauges. They're a little bit smaller. They're a 2-inch face, but the gauges that were originally in the car are 2-inch, and I've got a little bracket that I made to hold the gauges. It's painted, it's drying right now, so I can't pick it up to show you, but these gauges just happen to fit in it perfectly. That was a happy accident, but I'll get these gauges in there. Real quick, on threaded surfaces, a lot of people used to use, back in the day, used to use Teflon tape. There's a lot of guys who hate Teflon tape. Teflon tape's fine. There's a lot of people who say, oh, it's going to get loose and it's going to gum up your system, whatever. If you do it right, Teflon tape is not going to get loose and get into your oiling system or whatever. You just have to be careful about how you do it. In the Air Force, we Teflon taped everything, and it was mandated. We didn't have TFE paste, which is my preferred. This stuff's getting kind of old, but if I need to put some on a fitting, basically, I need to replace this bottle. It's getting old. You can see I can't even hardly get it off. But basically, you're just going to get it on here and you're going to smear it around, and it's thread sealer. And it works good. TFE paste is a Teflon. You can use it for fuel systems. You can use it for oil systems. You're not going to hurt anything with it. It's not going to get loose in your fuel system and cause your car to break down, or whatever threats people use to get people not to use Teflon tape. This is basically Teflon tape in a bottle. That's what it is. Smeared on the threads. You don't need a ton. You just need enough to where whenever you tighten it on, it's going to fill in the gaps and keep your stuff from leaking. So I'm going to pitch this in the trash and get a new bottle sometime this week. But there you go. Put a little bit on your threads. I don't monetize this channel. I don't have the intention to monetize this channel. I'll give a shout out though. That seems like a pretty decent gauge. We'll see whenever I get them wired up, see how they run. But the quality of the kit seems decent. They got the proper brass fittings to making this work and everything. It comes with some chintzy terminals. I'd throw those in the trash and use my own heat shrink connectors. You've got a thing where you can change the color of your gauge lights. It's got a couple brass fittings in there. And a grommet for running to the firewall, which I'm not going to use. I've already got a grommet on my firewall. So anyways, yeah, there you go, gauges. All right, so I got my gauge panel assembled. I put the more important gauge to the top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left. Fuel and volts, I'm not sure which one I actually consider more important there. I mean, if either one of those is dead, I mean, you can always swap a battery or refill a tank. You're going to get towed off the track if you run out of either. So as far as wiring, you can see I got all the wiring still to do here. These are for lighting, and then each gauge has a sending unit and power and ground. So that'll be the next step, is to start plugging that stuff in, get this put up on the dash. It's made to fit. On the back side of the steering column, there's 2 bolts that hold the steering mount in place, and this sits right on top of it. I've got a spot here in the middle. I'm going to put a dummy light, and so basically the oil pressure sending unit has both a gauge and then also has a dummy light trigger, so I can run a dummy light here. So I'm going to have to run another wire for that, but I'm actually pretty happy with that. I like having a dummy light for the oil pressure. That way, if it goes south, there's an immediate notice to the driver, hey, check your gauge, you're out of oil pressure. So I'll see about getting this in sometime today, maybe. I've got the wire in for doing the wiring on the the alternator and for the accessory relay. And so I'm probably going to do that wiring first. If I have time, I'll start wiring this gauge panel and get it in place. All right, so for the most part, I got the gauges, the power and the ground wired up on the gauges. This looks like a mess, but basically each gauge has to have its own power and ground, and then the lights also have to have power and ground. So basically there's 8 powers and grounds run here off of jumper wires. I used a bunch of these little jumper connections. I don't really like that they're just a crimp on and they're not a heat shrink insulation, but they work, and so I'm going to use them for now. And so I'm going to run the powers and ground out this way. I'm probably going to make a connector here for the gauge cluster, and then a connector on the harness, and then I'll have to have 3 sensing unit wires. This is fuel gauge, this is water temp, this is oil pressure. I'll have to have those wires coming in. The voltmeter, if you notice, the very first spot for the power and ground is the voltmeter. I want this to be accurate. So if there's any corrosion in these other connections, that'll lower the voltage. So it goes to the voltmeter first, then it jumps to each of these other ones for power and ground, and I'll have the 3 sensing wires come in. But I do have my trusty jump box here. I'll power it up real quick and see if it's working. Okay, so I've got it held here. All 4 gauges light up, and if you see all 4 needles are moving, when I get the sending units, it'll all read correctly. So this is the fuel gauge is reading full because there's nothing to tell it that it's less than full. Same for the oil pressure. There's no resistance there, and there's complete resistance in that circuit. The water temp is low. The voltmeter is the only gauge that's actually going to read accurately without the sensors held connected, and it's reading 12.5 volts, which is about right for the jump box. So there we go. Gauges are half wired. I can put this in the car now, and I just have to make a harness. Basically, I'm going to get a short section of each of the sensing wires, and I'll run those to a connector, and I'll make a plug-in, and then inside the car I'll make a plug-in for it. All right, so here's the gauge panel finished up. I've got a plug here on the end. I've got the wiring sheath. I probably need to put another zip tie right here in the middle. I'm not real crazy about all this rat's nest back here, but it's a gauge cluster. It's going to be like this. So I think that's good enough. I put one zip tie there, just kind of tie the wires together. That's about all it's doing. I may, when I put this on, I think I'm going to tuck this wire up under here like this, and I'll put an Adele clamp here to hold this. That way it's all nice and neat. But we'll see. An Adele clamp is just kind of, it'll be in the way, having it on here where the nut goes down. But at the same time, if it helps tie the wiring back, is it worth doing? I probably won't do it now that I think about it, but it's one of those things. It's a nice idea. I'll probably zip tie this to something just to make it more secure, so the wires aren't floating around, and I don't want a break forming from vibration. So, but there we go. I do still need to put a dummy light there, but then again, I'd have. I've only got 5 pins there, and I only got 5 pins on the harness, and that dummy light for the oil pressure would be a 6th pin. So, that may not happen. But gauge cluster is done. Shazam! That looks nice.